this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Joining me today on the podcast is Benjamin Treuhaft, CEO of Helpful Engineering, a global innovation ecosystem focused on generating deployable engineering solutions for social impact. With a background of more than 20 years in the imaging and advertising sectors, Benjamin has developed multiple hardware, software, and workflow process solutions to drive production efficiency, short time to market, and deliver value. I'll hand it over to him to expand on the other background information he'd like to share with us. Benjamin, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start with a little bit of background, if I can. Tell me a little bit about Helpful Engineering. It's really interesting.
Well, Helpful's in and of itself is an open source managing entity. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit that supports the Helpful community, which is an engineering-driven oriented community that's engaged in research, systems engineering, and then hardware and software environment and product development. So all of it free open source is the concept and the framework that we operate in, and we observe those principles. And our roadmap includes the provision of education and workforce development type functions for all these activities based on we use a mentorship and a coaching model, which is enormously rewarding for all, as well as we think a very effective model.
So we'll get more into that as well in just in a minute. But how about your background? I think I heard somewhere else that you kind of grew up in an environment that fostered innovation and creativity. So talk a little bit about that if you can.
I'm the product of an orthopedic surgeon and a research scientist, microbiologist, virologist. So I grew up in my mom's laboratory, my father's workshop in the middle of Wisconsin. So my early memories are of, doing chemistry with my mom at 4 and 5, making iodine bombs in the basement, to be perfectly honest. I wanted my own little pop rocks awesome. Kind of thing. And learning that, playing with the electron microscope, doing agar separations and things like that, like pinhole cameras, that we learned how to, mom was amazing that way. She was really, those years were the gift that keep on giving. And my father was a maker. He loved working in wood, but as a surgeon, was never ever happy with the tools of that age. And he was engaged in, his real area of practice was after the first generation of artificial hips. All those things failed very quickly, 5 years maybe, and they would have to be replaced with the next generation. And the tools weren't great for a surgeon. They were so he would work on his own tools, kind of come up with a concept that would, and then we would, I got to go to one of the early CNC machine shops at Zimmer, where those wood prototypes would be translated into early CAD, and then you could sit there and have lunch while they would spit out the prototype on the floor, this enormous floor with these great big machines. But they were amazing. They were like incredible to watch these 3 and 4 axis machines go, and then the thing go in the sintering ovens, and it just was it was incredibly inspirational as a kid to see something like that happen. I couldn't have been more than 5-10 years old, throughout this period. It just was unbelievable. Ever since then, I've understood the world in terms of problem solving, but we all do that.
I thought I was doing good with a chemistry set at that age. You were building iodine bombs and pinhole cameras, man.
Your parents enable you if, that's their role in life, right? To build you.
For sure. So the work that Helpful Engineering does to address sustainability challenges is innovative, inspiring, to say the very least, obviously. Can you share more about the company's mission and the passion you have for addressing the many sustainability challenges our world faces today?
Sure. Well, our mission is to deliver an openly engineered solution everywhere. Because that's what an open solution should be able to do. And if you can solve it once, it should propagate and solve everywhere that it can. And there's no real, in this sense, open source is very much a go-to-market strategy to drive adoption. If you make the thing available and then you enable people to use it, a good solution that's collectively developed can have impact much faster. So that's kind of the way we think about things. We look to this overarching mission of delivering these solutions, to bring into reality what we think will be a better world where people have improved access to resources, education, and opportunity to use these things, to own them. And that'll increase innovation, our problem solving as a species, as a planet, and will make us all more stable and frankly more prosperous. So,
right.
And we use the vehicle for this of our real life projects. The work itself is what enables all this to happen. And that's an iterative, dynamic, and integrated process.
Right. So what are some of the specific challenges that your teams are working to find solutions for today? I know, and I'll ask a follow-up question about some of the big wins. I've seen some of the things you guys have done, which are phenomenal, but kind of what are your challenges you're working on right now?
I think probably the most important one, there are many, and they're all, again, integrated and part and parcel of a whole, but probably the most important thing is to enable our various supply bases, whether it's manufacturing or whether it's education, the delivery of healthcare goods and services, for example, to become resilient. So, this has been a national and global objective, for a decade or more. There's multiple executive orders on this from the president, the White House. So individuals and organizations have been calling attention for a long time to the risks associated with long supply type chains and lines, and across all areas of endeavor, all industry sectors. And chains as they're currently conceived they're brittle. They have a brittle property. And so we have to enable these things to have a resilient property, to become resilient. This is what the last couple of years have been about. We've had a critical presentation of this flaw, if you will, in the way that we've composed our enterprises, our activities across all things. So we have to fix that to fix everything else, because if you construct a technology environment or a product without having the frameworks in place to enable resiliency, they're all going to not be resilient. The delivery of the good or service isn't going to work. So you got to solve at that high level first, and then everything else kind of falls into place. So to do this, we've developed in the conjunction with the Department of Commerce and NIST in particular, a new supply chain interoperability specification, which enables all actors that participate in the delivery of a good or service, from a producer, supplier, a payer, an end user, to define the requirements and interact. So this is a new platform to introduce this resilient property so everybody knows how to interact, what they need. So I'm looking forward to launching that at the International Manufacturing Technology Show in September. And that's going to be kind of to illustrate, it'll come along with anybody engaged in production and supply of goods and services to become more resilient. We want there'll be a couple of example products that might come along out of that available to producers in that context, to drive their efficiency. And it's just a taste of what's possible. There's only so much we can do over the last 2 years, fundamentally being unresourced. We did this because we thought it needed to be done, because we were mad about the way things went. We weren't going to take it anymore. So if you want something, do it yourself.
Right. So really, if I understand, then you're attacking the problem from the top level. Because I was thinking more, I was really focused more on products. Like I know you guys have done a lot with PPE and respirators and things like that, but you're actually trying to attack it at the very top level.
What we've done to date have formed the basis for really interesting case studies around why that systems of systems level approach is necessary. And each of the artifacts that have come out of Helpful, each of the products has a different story about the challenges of bringing an openly developed product to market. And they have informed us what we have to do at that system of systems level. And so whether it's been the origami shield that came out of Helpful in the very first 2 weeks of the pandemic, that has which was the simplest of artifacts, simply a design that went on to probably be, we can't even count how many times the thing got made as a face shield. Now there are other good, even better face shields, but that was a good first example, and it's still the lowest cost one on the planet. And it's good for certain use cases, but that's been picked up by industry, and a company called Boyd made that thing 50 million times or more now. Who knows how many now. But we also know people around the world were able to pick that design up immediately and put a piece of PPE in the hands of a first responder. And we saw this happen again with the Maker mask design, which now has led to the person who worked on that directly contributed to the research around the new ASTM standard for fabric masks. So these were critical, seminal explorations in how open source worked in actual products intended for real life, immediate response and impact. And we also saw where these things kind of went wrong, and we saw some harms with certain things because people didn't know how to interact with these things right. So we saw everything at a systems level, from incorrect resource allocation, which cost people money, or a perceived risk because they didn't understand open source. So they're afraid, well, I'm going to spin this up. Well, if I'm going to spend a lot of money, I'm going to introduce a bunch of risk to my enterprise around, am I going to get sued? Well, no, you're not. It's free open source. Just observe the terms of the license, which just typically in open source just means say thank you. Put a little credit in your packaging that says, this is based on an open source product. But entities own the liability for what they do, so they're not really at risk. There's a lot of how-to that goes into making something, and that is unique to them.
So you started to share what I'm going to call your origin story here. You started to share a little bit of it because you said you were mad and you just weren't going to take it anymore. But I think it's fascinating how you went from 0 to 100, like literally in 3 weeks. So, if I got the numbers right, hopefully I did, but I think it started off with 10 of you chatting on Slack, and then 3 weeks later, there's 13,000 volunteers.
Yeah, and I wasn't even in the first group of that Slack, but I was there pretty early. I mean, I was in the first couple of hundred people that came in. Everybody saw. There were kind of the antennas were twitching as COVID swept west. Everybody saw Italy go down, and I maybe a couple of days in advance in April, was yelling on Twitter with everyone else in the universe, and found a couple of other like-minded people. Because basically we were like, how hard can it be to go pick some parts up off the shelf and make a ventilator if that's what the shortage is going to be? And that was the perception at the time. And I did a little looking online. I was like, this is not hard. Not really. At least it didn't seem hard. But you don't understand requirements, and you might not understand some of the integrative principles around it. But there were many people like this. So, the way I like to think about the way, where everything else in the world felt like it was freezing except our first responders and hospitals and ambulances around the world. It felt like nobody else kind of knew what to do. And so we had, in the space of 3 weeks, more than, 13,000 people on board to this Slack, and just go to work. Like, it was just 13,000 people running into the fire, because we weren't going to sit around and wait for anybody else to do nothing. Yeah. We couldn't do nothing.
Right. So So that was 13,000 volunteers very, very quickly. Is it still all volunteer based, or is there now some hierarchy you're having to put into place? Or I know you said you're a nonprofit, so.
Yeah, we are a nonprofit and we are still all volunteer, but that's going to have to convert for us to really do what we need to do. The resource has to come in here now. We've gone about as far as we can go, without going out and doing that. Now, all that work is well underway. There is hierarchy. I mean, just because you volunteer doesn't mean that you don't organize. And we are organized. We have an amazing team. The people that work on and within the community are amazing people.
Right.
They all believe that things can be better. And because they're engineers, they're good at taking a good look at something, making a plan, and having a great deal of confidence that they know what they're doing. Engineering is a known quantity, and as such, and I'm inspired by the rigor and the discipline of these folks each and every day. I'm not inherently an engineer. I'm trained as a historian, a photographer, an artist. But I get it. I mean, I grew up in problem solving in the sciences, and I've always brought that to to what I do now. I just was one of the only people in the Slack that had any managerial experience in business.
Well, I think I think people who are engineers probably knew they wanted to be an engineer early on. I know I did. I'm an electrical engineer, and by training at least. And I knew by the time I was 8 years old, that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I think you kind of have that calling and you kind of figure it out along the way.
It helps you make the world make sense. It's a framework for making the world make sense and achieving an outcome.
Yeah. I always joke that I like the fact I could look up in the back of the book and confirm 2 + 2 was indeed 4. And when you start getting into English questions and essay questions, it becomes too subjective for me because I think I answered right when my teacher didn't.
We can have a conversation at another time about the intrinsic or hidden logic of language that is kind of no different than this. These basic Euclidean principles or Hildegard or whatever. It really is all part and parcel.
That's fascinating. We should definitely follow up with another podcast on that then. Now, I'm involved in Slack groups that only have 10 people, and I have a hard time keeping track of all the conversation threads. So how in the world did you do that with 13,000 different individuals?
Well, the way that we, the way that all of us turn it, and we're still reeling from the experience. We haven't recovered yet, but maybe the best way to explain it is it's like launching a car down the road at 200 miles an hour when you haven't even designed, let alone built the wheels, the chassis, the framework, and the engine, but it's going 200 miles. So you're just, do I recommend it? I do not. It was done out of necessity. Fortunately, it took a strength of will to, just to participate in it. It wasn't for everybody. It's very, very, very challenging environment at the beginning. And it's smoothing out. We have an operating model at this point, and that's functioning. And slowly we're being able to explain to people how to interact whether it's through that Slack or the other activities. And there's a great deal of engineering going on there, not just drawing it out, not just the logical models, but actually code being written that will enable those interactions to happen.
So are there learnings from that experience? I mean, I can't think of any other organization that's going to try to go from, 0 to 13,000 in 3 weeks, but let's say it's more reasonable. You're trying to grow your business. You're trying to scale it. Is there learnings that you can share with people to say, I wish we'd done this differently or that differently?
The most important thing right up front is to really define these models, your managerial model, your operational model, your sustainability model. Get the fundamentals of how you do what you do and how to interact with you. And we're very big believers in don't build anything without your customer in the room. That maxim, but the way that you go about those consultations that lead to a well-formed organization that's capable of generating well-formed solutions. Go to that scoping right away. And it might not be perfect. The enemy of good is great, right? But get it down and get it out there and iterate that really hard as your first thrust, those 3 areas. And if you do that, you'll set yourself up well to do it, and put boundaries on it. If you give yourself 30 days to do something, it'll take you 30 days. If you give yourself 3 hours, it'll take 3 hours.
Yeah, I do project management is my day job. And one of the things we talk about is durations. And I always say durations become self-fulfilling prophecies. I mean, so whatever you, like you just said, whatever you put out there, that's what it ends up taking. You got to bound yourself.
That's what it does. And I'm a big believer in agile and lean, which is that, fail small, fast, cheap. Eventually you're going to stop failing. It's going to work. But just do it really a lot fast at the beginning. Right. Be at home with the failure. The failures are wins and informative in and of themselves. Oh yeah,
for sure. You learn from the failures.
Nobody learns from success.
Exactly.
You learn from failure.
So I want to take a few minutes to talk about the people side of the organization and business model. I think if I got the number right, currently we're up talking about a community base of around 19,000+ volunteers, obviously not paid. What was the most surprising thing you experienced or learned about managing people since Helpful took off about 2 years ago?
I don't know if it's so much surprising, but it's been humbling for me. Because your management of people comes with your management of yourself. That comes first. So for me, I've always been somebody that's just kind of out in front and doing whatever, and it falls into place for me. But in this case, to enable my folks to do this community to do and achieve its potential, I have to learn to shut up and really listen. It's a really huge lesson to really learn how to not only hear, but to listen and understand. You have to, and that starts with you. Nobody else can do that for you. So just simply relearning that critical element of communication in each of these, in this environment, is probably the single biggest takeaway.
Okay. So I'm sure you have many projects going on in parallel, and I'm curious, what kind of processes do you have in place to keep those on the rail, and not out of the ditch?
Well, we always iterate those things. We have a review cycle pretty much weekly, to be honest with you. And the way that the frameworks that we're building out, everything has a framework, checks, steps, gates, constant review. Fundamental principle is never be afraid to burn the thing to the ground, and just reconfigure it, recompose what you're doing. More than anything, and so whether in the larger scheme of what we're doing, there's not just our sort of our onboarding processes, which are constantly iterated, that revolve around finding the person, identifying somebody's capabilities, and then some matching to not only interests, but those interests might be what they really currently know how to do and can be immediately impactful, but also what they want to learn, and then matching that with the right resource to learn what they don't know how to learn, so that you set them up for success. So that's one process. The second then is the development process, our pipeline process, another open technology that will eventually enable work with the supply chain or operability specification. So, a stage gate process for review resulting, in an MVP of whatever it is you're making. That, that's something, the MVP being a little bit of a platonic ideal, but by the time it comes out of this process quickly, is fully tested, peer reviewed. You have some confidence in the thing before you actually go and make it at scale or implement it. And then these things are going to move into digital libraries where they're available, that include those test results, so that, and all of these are the types of things we constant iteration around these things according to engineering disciplines and rigor.
I think the key that what I'm hearing there is fail fast, because I know some of the projects that I've been involved with in my career, people, the longer it goes on, the more people get committed to it, and they start to, they don't want to burn it to the ground, right? They feel some ownership for it, and it bothers them to let it go, even though we know it's a bad project. We should kill it. We're too invested now, right? So,
well, for us, the investment isn't necessarily in the particular product. The investment is in success and in a better future. So if the product is in the way of that, it's no good. And whatever, if it was ill-conceived. And this is one of the really challenging things, and this was another hard lesson that we really had to learn, especially because one of the interesting characteristics of this community, even though extremely experienced engineers, and as time has gone on, we've had more and higher quality talent come, which is quite interesting. But it has been, what that talent has informed is, make sure at a very high level you understand what your business objectives are, and then establish your product and user requirements. Well, like a lot of folks that haven't operated in these industries or these sectors, like, this is, on the one hand, it should be well understood, and on the other hand, like, this is one of those things that if you don't really kind of understand how these frameworks work, you're not going to necessarily know to do that. You just have the perception this thing is needed, and you just go and make it. But if you don't get that stuff done, the rest of it's not going to work.
right.
You're not going to have the sustainability model for the thing when it goes out into the world, or be able to engage with customers, engage with capital, or engage with a buyer or whatever, payer. It doesn't matter. It's all going to fall apart. So even though the thing might be great, the information isn't able to be organized and communicated properly, which is, of course, the overarching objective of life.
In your LinkedIn bio, you define success as, this understanding delivered real, meaningful value. It was worth our time to do the work. What is this definition rooted in, and how does it shape the way you make decisions on a daily basis?
That's a good question. I think of it as intrinsic to our vision. Meaningful. So, in these contexts, something not only has to be, I think of things out of the healthcare as in 3A's context. Something has to be available, it has to be accessible, and it has to be acceptable. All right. And I think those are true of every delivery of a piece of information. Somebody it has to be there. The information has to be there. You have to be able to get at the information in a way that you can get at it. So whether that's affordable or, just it's like within reach. Okay. You can get the book, and you can afford the book. And then it has to be, acceptable. Like, all of those things, those dimensions, like how you got it has to be acceptable. The cost of it has to be acceptable. But the way it's written has to be acceptable, that it's like you enjoy, you will take it in and internalize it. You will use the thing. So you'll adopt it, in part. And, to me, having done a lot of stuff and put up a lot of product and service over the course of my life, and imaging, advertising, and marketing contexts of various sorts, I've seen so much fail. Like, even it's just such a fight to get stuff across. Well, why is it such a fight? Once again, people don't understand what it is, how it's going to work, that it's going to have value to them, make them more efficient. It's funny. I work really hard because I don't like to work.
Interesting.
I want to go do other stuff, but I can't. This is too big a thing. Like it's too big a problem. Like, I really just want to hang out and paint, but I can't, because this has to be done. And until things work better in this world, I'm not done working.
Well,
and also I got to be honest too, as I say that, because I sound like I'm really negative, and I'm really not. I have an enormous amount of fun doing this. It's so much fun.
Right. Not as much fun as painting, but
those contradictions are human too.
So what do you see as the 10-year vision for Helpful Engineering and the social impact that your guys are having? Maybe hard to articulate since you're still putting the car together, going 200 miles an hour.
Well, no, I really do think I know what it might look like, and I think the easiest way to explain it is in terms of dollars, because that's something people seem to sort of understand and stick. Although I think that the return on investment, when people understand what the investment required here is, will be significantly more, because There's ROI, and then there's something called SROI. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept. Well, these are other measurable impacts that come outside of what we currently just defined in the dollars. But these things can be included in a type of balance sheet, an expanded balance sheet. I think balance sheets are very useful tools. They're just the way that they've been deployed for the, since the Medicis, the Italians started really working with them, has just been kind of one dimensional, but they do tell stories about other things. And SROI represents an expanded balance sheet concept beyond just the dollar, although you can start then putting dollar amounts to the things that come out of SROI. And so what do I see? Well, so over the last couple of years, for example, our partners at NIST that we worked on supply chain with, in 2021, they managed to make the U.S. manufacturing base $20 billion in extra profit. Now, they did that just by knowing how to effectively organize and communicate information, and without the supply chain interoperability specification. So using system of systems, cyber physical concepts, they drove a lot of efficiency, made the right thing, the right time, the right way, and manufacturing generated a lot of value. Let's call it that. I think just maybe in 10 years, we can potentially make that X200.
Wow.
That number, just with that one thing, by really doing this right. And that's not including expanding these concepts and the efficiency and the resiliency that come along with them to other areas of human endeavor besides just manufacturing, our education. This will be a synergistic, integrative response that's enabled. And the outcomes, I think, are just going to be beautiful. I think people are going to be a lot happier. They're going to feel more empowered. They're going to find that opportunity. One of the things, I go out and I listen to my friends down, in the neighborhood, and they're very frustrated. Like, they don't quite understand how the world works or how to interact with it or how to become valuable in the way that they feel that they are. And I don't want to hear that, not because I'm angry at them. They shouldn't find it that hard to make a living.
Right.
Nobody should. If, you should be able to be empowered. Okay, I want to go do this. I know I need to do 1, 2, 3 in my education. I know I need to do this. And then these are going to open. I know that job is still going to kind of be there because that's where the industry's at. There's a path for me. I want to know my path through the graph. That's what we really want to see happen here. We want to see everybody know their paths through the graph, whether they're individuals or organizations, that they don't waste time and money being valuable.
Right.
That's a simple way of putting it. And it's a little incomplete, but we think we'll end up with a healthier, happier planet if all that happens.
I agree. So what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think there've been many over the course of my life. The one that really sticks in my head the most, and I think about, is something that my grandfather started telling me when I was really young. He said, "Benjamin, the most important thing in this world is integrity." Now, I've puzzled on that one my whole life. It's not just, integrity isn't just about honesty. Although that is a very important part of it. Probably the best metaphor for it is a naval analogy. Integrity speaks a hull or a ship, not just whether or not that hull is fractured or whether it takes on water over the top and founders. You have to stay level to sail properly on any stormy or choppy water. And, you need to know where to bail, and you got to know how to patch that hull if something happens. All of these things, these metaphors they're meaningful to me when I think about integrity. But I think that's probably the most important piece of advice. So, I've spent most of my life trying to discover what it means, and be that.
That's a good piece of advice from your grandfather.
He was a wise man.
You had quite the family, dad, mom, and granddad. So that's awesome.
Takes a family to build a person, you know.
It does, doesn't it? Absolutely. So this has been really great, Benjamin.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to get involved with your organization, how can they do that?
Well, you know, there's a lot of ways to interact with us. You know, if you just want to come and work on something, just go to our website, sign up on the Slack, you know, and come and say hi to me. I'm Bent, B-E-N-T on Slack. You can come and find me directly. I'm happy to talk to you and get you oriented in our environment, because it can be a little challenging still. It's, you know, we're not all the way there. If you're not going to come, and if what you don't want is to contribute in that way, if what you want to see is the potential that we represent realized, and you want to see it sooner rather than later, you know, if you're a funding type contributor, you can reach me directly. You can find me through LinkedIn, or you can find me, you know, through the info inbox at Helpful, or come right to the Slack and just knock on my door. My door is essentially revolvingly open. And, you know, we've been, you know, as we are sort of putting out, you know, we're getting ready to do our real scoping activity, you know, even though we know what we want to be and what those frameworks should be across managerial operations and sustainability, and then what comes out of all of those things, governance, for example. You know, it's time for other folks to inform what they would want from us. So we need to design with those customers in the room that will contribute the real funding to unlock the potential of what this ecosystem is. So, you know, those are probably the best ways. If you're an engineer, come and make something, and if you want to contribute in another way, come and talk to me.
And to be clear, the website is helpfulengineering.org. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. Well, Benjamin, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Hey, thanks for having me. I mean, I love this. So thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to clintonmpaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.